Good afternoon once again. We are glad to have you here with us when discussing an interesting topic on sports washing. For those who might have joined a couple of minutes late, we are joined by a distinguished panel of people who are very knowledgeable on the subject. These are lawyers, but operating in the interesting field of sport. We have with us also our chairperson, Noor, who I'll just ask to just reintroduce the subject again once more, once we're all in here, and then we'll take it up from there. Thank you. Please, Noor.
Thank you, Timothy. Good afternoon again, everyone. As earlier omitted, my name is Khairan Noor. I'm the chairperson of the ELS Sports Law Committee and currently serving also as the Learning and Development Coordinator at Middle East Sports Law. So once again, welcome everyone to today's webinar, Sports Washing, the new money laundering and sanctions avoidance mechanism. We're delighted to have a distinguished panel of experts with us to explore a topic of growing concern in the world of international finance, sports, and law enforcement. In recent years, sports has become more than just a source of entertainment. They have evolved into a global industry with billions of dollars in circulation. However, we've seen with this rapid growth comes the darker side of industry, which is sports washing. This term refers to the use of sports to conceal illicit financial activities, including money laundering and sanctions evasion. While these practices are not limited to one sport or region, football has been particularly vulnerable, given its global reach, immense financial flows, and complex ownership structures. So today we will delve into the intricacies of how sports washing operates, its impact on the integrity of sports, and the broader implications of international finance and law. Our discussion will also cover the role of legal professionals in combating these activities and the opportunities and challenges they face in this evolving landscape. We have a packed agenda today, and I encourage all participants to engage actively in the discussion. Your insights and questions will be invaluable as we seek to understand and address the challenges posed by sports washing. Again, welcome, and let's get started. Thank you. You're muted, Timothy.
Yes, sorry about that. Many thanks to our chairperson of the ELS Sports Law Cluster for that wonderful introduction, and all of you for sparing your time and spending it with us this afternoon. On the panel, unfortunately, we don't have Mr. Farai Rosano from South Africa. Encountered an emergency just a couple of hours ago, but we pray that he'll find a minute or two to join us in and share his insights. But we are fortunate enough to have Dr. Rukari Donald. He is the chairperson of the Uganda Olympic Committee. He's just fresh from Paris, getting not only the theoretical part of it, but the practical feel of what it means to be in this world of sport. And I would wish to invite Dr. Rukari to introduce himself further. Thank you. Doctor, please.
Thank you, Timothy. Thank you, Noor, and good afternoon, good morning, habari to all our colleagues from the East African Law Society and those who are also tuning in and watching from different jurisdictions. I'd like, first of all, to thank Gabriel and team and Noor for inviting me to be part of this very interesting and growing community of practice of sports law. I'm happy that the Law Society of East Africa is taking this up. We have been in this area for quite a while. But just a brief intro, I'm Donald Rukari. I'm a lawyer, Ugandan lawyer, who has been in the area of practice of law for the last 30 years. Started out as a state prosecutor, private practice, worked with the Inspectorate of Government, and then joined the diplomatic area working for Irish Aid, European Union, and more recently, USAID projects on human rights and governance. But in the sports area, I'm a former national swimmer. I then transitioned from swimming into sports administration, heading the Swimming Federation for a while, joined the Olympic Committee as Secretary General and now the President, but also I teach sports law both here in Uganda and abroad in Madrid, and also the IOC Masters in Sports Management. I'm a sports pass administrator, arbitrator, and I do it with consulting for a number of sports organizations. So I'm happy to be here, and I look forward to an engaging discussion on this growing area, emerging area of sports washing and its intersection with money laundering. Thank you, Timothy and you.
Many thanks, Don. Such an inspiring resume. I know many of us on the call look forward to following into your steps, learning from you. And that is why partly we're here this afternoon to share, to be able to also pick from the vast amount of knowledge and practice or experience that you have in this field. But with us also is another lawyer from the United Republic of Tanzania. And to add on to that, he is also the founder of one of the nuances in sports discipline in eSport. So he's the founder of the Esports Association in Tanzania. And we are happy to have him. Peter, please, kind enough to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, Timos, for having me. And Nor, Kyla, and thank you, Gabriel, for having me. As what Timos has introduced me, I'm Peter Mshikirwa, a lawyer based in Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, practicing now for 15 years as an advocate of High Court of Tanzania, but also a sport lawyer and the president of eSport Federation of Tanzania. It is great honor to sit as a panelist, and actually I'm very happy sitting along with my former lecturer, Dr. Doni Rukare, who taught me at ISD Madrid. So I'm very happy to have this opportunity, and I hope we'll have a lot of insights on the subject matter. Thank you very much.
All right. Many thanks, Peter. Like you can hear, we are blessed to have you this afternoon. Your co-moderator is of the smallest of CVs on what you hear from today. Also a sports lawyer practicing in Uganda, practicing with KT Advocates, also a FIFA licensed agent, and also engaged in the academia at Uganda Christian University, Kyambogo University, and Kampala International University. But let's now dive right into it by inviting back Noor to take us through the first talking points for the day. Noor?
Yes, thank you, Timothy. And anyway, for interest of time, we'd love to know more about our experts' backgrounds. But just to start, and this question would be pointed to Dr. Rukare. Can you explain to us what sports washing is and how has that evolved in the recent years? And just as you explain that, maybe you can also point out how sports washing differs from traditional money laundering techniques and why this particular area is gaining popularity.
Thank you very much, Noor, and it's good, as I said, to be here, and habari to David as well. Well, sports washing is an interesting concept, that has come up. Some people trace it back, if you look at the academia, they trace it back to 1936, to the Berlin Olympics, when we had the Olympics in Germany, and there was a bit of a move to protest the Olympics being in Germany because of what was going on at the time. And I think you know who was in charge at that time, Hitler. And they're saying it was using sports to, in many ways, if you wish, hide or enhance the image of a country that was going through a negative spot. So sports washing, in its definition, is the practice or of either individuals, countries, states, governance, of using sports to portray their country or themselves in a positive light and try and deflect from the negative publicity or negative attributes that a country or an individual might be going through. So that's the basic definition of sports washing. And in many ways, sports washing also has another aspect to it, that where you're using sports to launder money, in many ways, let's say to sanitize the money through sports. And that is in many ways, that's where the money laundering aspect comes in. Because money laundering really is, if I'm to put it in very simplistic terms, I don't get too legalistic. Money laundering really is the question around how you are disguising financial inflows or financial flows, disguising them or these assets so they cannot be detected, and then legalize them through, pushing them through different ways. And there's layering, placement and concealment. So sports washing really, in a nutshell, Noor and the listeners out there, is the practice we're getting some feedback of using sports activities, sports events, sports structures to portray a country in a positive light and deflect from its negative image, but also it can be used to proliferate illicit funding through sports washing in order to legalize this and sanitize this money and put it into the system legally. So that would be what I would want to, and I think we trace this origins back to 1936. And since then, I'm sure in the course of this conversation, we will be discussing a number of events, but the beginning point for some people is 1936 with the Berlin Olympics, where Hitler was accused of using sports to deflect from what was going on in Germany and portray Nazi Germany at that point in a positive light. So we use the event to deflect and position a country in a positive light.
Thank you for that, Dr. Don. I think I'll hand over to my co-moderator, Timothy, for the next question.
Yes, thanks, Laura and Don, but I would like to stay with you, Doctor. And Peter, you could feel free to jump in if anything interests you. So over the time, like you've highlighted, we've seen many media reports showing how, or at least alluding to how these mega sports events are used in what is dubbed as sports washing. Many of the criticized probably could highlight in the recent years the World Cup that was hosted in Russia, the World Cup that is just concluded in the Middle East, and we have one that is still taking shape very next to us here in one of the East African partner states, which is the BAL, Basketball Africa League, that is being funded by at least a partnership with the NBA to create a league that has big names, including Barack Obama. And many people, especially in the media on the fourth estate, report that this is not something that is organized purely in good faith. And it is alleged that many of the people who, and especially the leaders of this world, that are using these mega sports events to, you could say, whitewash or clean up the image of their countries, including their own individual political careers. And of course, they are making calls. Many of them have gone, of course, unheeded to the bodies such as IOC, FIFA, not to go ahead with organizing these events in those countries. And they could cost us as much as, let's say, if you could say, if I had a chance to listen, at least from the officials from Rwanda, that the impact that BAL is having on the continent, if you take that away from us, then it's not, let's say, the leader that you're targeting that will suffer, but the people who, or you could say, they would have been beneficiaries to having such mega events in those countries. And of course, these countries also look at these mega sports events as opportunities to showcase what could be termed as their true identities, their true cultures, their true history, without suffering the confines of what you could say the Western media would like to craft it as. So our question would be, from the recent time, what could you pick out as those that could be, of course, could keep it as as correct as you wish in whatever angle you would want to bring it. But what events in the past can we pick out as to highlight on how we can learn on what sports washing is in the practical sense and what we can relate to, and if any of those events are there, what could be the pros and cons in describing them as such?
Well, thank you, Timothy. First of all, the line between politics and sports is very thin. And the general principle that we have in sports is that sports is apolitical. We are not going to dive into the politics of the global politics. We've just come back from Paris. There was a very big, and within sports, there's always what you're seeing globally, within the global architecture, you have a lot of what I would call creative tensions between different states. I don't want to get into it, but you know that globally right now we have a number of ongoing conflicts. We saw that some countries were not able to participate fully in the Olympics in Paris due to the political issues, whether it is the ongoing issue in the Middle East or in the far Asia with what's going on and in general. But the general principle that we have, Timothy and the listeners out there, is that sports and politics are separate. We should not conflate politics, that's global politics, with sports. With sports, we are looking at coming together to celebrate sports, the best interests of the athletes, and we should try and separate as much as possible sports from politics. However, we are seeing that these days there's an increasing emphasis that when it comes to hosting mega events, we pay particular attention to issues like human rights, labor standards, money laundering issues, and not using sport as a vehicle to hide. But also what I know, there's the whole issue around the third piece to this, the legacy of some of these mega events. Let's appreciate that in order for any city or any country, whether it's Paris, whether it is Kigali, whether it is Los Angeles, you need the backing of the state or the government to host these mega events. Let's first agree on that. So if that is agreed, the state plays an important role in backstopping hosting of these major events. You need the support of the state. And therefore we acknowledge and we applaud where the state comes in to backstop these mega events. Because for example, if Uganda was to host, we're going to host AFCON here. We need to, together with our colleagues in Kenya and Tanzania, you need the state to come in, for example, guarantee security, provision of security, provision of the visas, issues around the facilities sometimes will be set up by the government. So the relationship between the sports people, ourselves, and government cannot be overemphasized. But what some people are now saying is that we should not use sports to hide, to create this, what they call sports washing, what other people are now calling reputational laundering, where you're trying to launder the reputation of a country or of an individual. But for me, I'm seeing that some of these mega events, whether it's the Olympics, the World Cup, Formula One, basketball, the BAL, these are golden opportunities to be able to showcase, because one of the advantages of this is that having an event hosted in a particular location brings a number of dividends. One, the economy will be spurred. For example, in Paris, we had close to, I think, 200,000 people in Paris. So your hotels will benefit, your taxi industry, your night economy, your restaurants, your telecoms, the whole night economy will be ignited. The travel sector will move. So hosting these mega events, there's dividends that come with having a mega event in your country. But that does not mean it should be at the expense of the human rights, labor standards, and other concerns that might be there. That's why these days, as we'll discuss later, what we are seeing when it comes to awarding these events, there's emphasis on ensuring that the human rights record is maintained. You're looking at issues around knowing your customers from money laundering, not using it as an opportunity to launder money and other things. But by and large, Timothy, I believe that the benefits of hosting these mega events far outwash, or in many ways, if you want to outstrip the negative aspects that will come with the, let's say, the illicit flows and the sports wash that might come with it. All right. So to me, It's about focusing on what are the benefits of hosting these mega events, but keeping in mind that we need to guard against the ills that could be associated with whether it's illicit transfer of funds globally, money laundering, sports washing, and hiding gross violations of human rights. Luckily, I'm a human rights lawyer. I understand that we should not use sports to hide what's going on, but rather ensure that we put in safeguard systems. And a lot of work is being done, for example, with the Center for Human Rights in Geneva, and a number of international federations, the IOC, are putting safeguards in place that once you have the hosting guidelines, issues around combating illicit flows, manipulation of sport, human rights standards, all these are issues that are now on the table. And even in football, which you're more familiar with, the fit and proper person tests are being applied in terms when it comes to hosting the events, transfer of players, acquiring clubs, and all these kind of issues. So to me, it's something that we need to be aware of. But I start from where I was conclude from where I started. Sports and politics should be separate, and we should never conflate and bring the political aspects of what's going on globally, the conflicts, the disagreements, the political posturing, bring it into sport. For us, sport is supposed to be bringing everybody together, irrespective of what at the global level our countries might be having politically if there are disagreements. In sport, there is no disagreement. It's you come to the field of play, you win or lose, shake hands, and go forward.
All right. Many thanks for that, Doctor. I would want to also bring in Peter to see what his thoughts are. So, Peter, like you just listened in from Doctor, sport is a political, and of course, also mentioning there that, of course, the benefits of hosting these mega sports events do outweigh whatever concerns that may be that could come out. Would want to know whether it's something that you do agree, it's a question that you do share, or you could have a divergent view on that, or if anything that probably we could have left out while tackling this this issue of bringing in mega sports events into countries whose record may be questionable, especially in terms of human rights. Peter?
Yeah, thank you, Timothy. So, doctors just taking it all. Maybe on adding what has been said, to me, what I see from the human rights and the concern which are there, for instance, in bigger events like the Olympic, the World Cup, and the like. To my concern is on the ethical consideration on the when it comes to this events, and actually with the growing now of sports, I'm little getting stuck when it comes to politics and the sports. Because actually you see sometimes it is hard to separate the two, and that makes a bit confusion or problem. But as what Doctor has said, it should be sport has to be left alone, and it should not be interfered with political affiliation of the country or of the people who are hosting or organizing the events.
All right. Thanks, Peter, for sharing that. I would like to invite back Noor to take us into the next segment. Noor?
Yeah, thank you, both Dr. Don and Peter. I know when we come into the topic of sports and politics, it's a whole other, probably a webinar on its own, because it's always hard to kind of find the separation or the balance between the two, because at the end of the day, in as much as we want sports to be separated from politics, we find how in most cases politics does somehow influence sports, especially when it comes to mega sporting events. And I know, Dr. Don, you kind of touched onto this as you're explaining your point earlier on, but I would like to go to Mr. Peter on this. Given the growing threats of sports washing, what legal frameworks are in place to combat this practice, and are they sufficient?
Yeah, we have a number of legal framework. For instance, we do understand each country has legal framework concerning the money laundering, bribery, and the like. But we have also a legal framework which are governed by sports bodies like International Olympic Committee, the FIFA, which have rules and regulation or concerning event, selection of hosting countries, but also ethical standards for sports events and hosting nations. The second segment of the question, maybe given the fact that sports on its own, it has a complex financial. I mean, sports are the sports as what we call financial complexity, which sometimes gives a challenge to the established legal framework. And as you understand that the sports involve multiple jurisdiction, and even the ownership structure, sometimes it is hidden. You cannot see it you cannot see it clear. Sometimes it is hidden, and we do have, for instance, the third party ownership, where company X maybe owns a club in UK and has its roots maybe in the US. So, given the financial complexity of the sports, sometimes the legal framework might not have a better room or a better tooth to bite, and sometimes with the growing now trend of sport washing, it is also difficult in terms of, for instance, in football, where you have market manipulation, transfer of high-profile players. But at least we have legal framework in place.
Thank you for that, Peter. And still on to you as you expand more on this. So how do the rules against third-party ownership in football, AML regulations and laws on filing beneficial ownership forms for clubs and corporate entities, and the fit and proper purpose in tests for major sports leagues contributing to addressing this issue?
Yeah. Basically, as I said, these rules or regulations are there to protect or to enhance any threat concerning sport washing. Now, given the fact that the rules are in place, and the going trend now with, as what I said before, the complexity of the transfers and the hidden structures that pose a big challenge that sometimes you cannot afford to see exact, and the legal framework might be defeated in some instances.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Peter. And maybe Dr. John, you'd like to add on to that before we move to the next question?
Thank you, Nuru. Just to build on what our colleague Peter has said from TZ, is very right. And normally when we talk about the legal framework for sports, we take a three-tiered approach. We talk about what's happening nationally, regionally, and internationally. So at the national level, as Peter has rightly said, we have a number of laws that we are using within, let's say, from the public sector side. So in the case of Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, who are part of East Africa, we have the Anti-Money Laundering Act. We have nowadays the Data Privacy and Protection Act. So we have these domestic laws, which we are applying. We also have, in some cases, rules and regulations for some federations, not many, but maybe from football because of what's happening at FIFA, which will require you to disclose your sources of income. We talked about the beneficial owners. Here, for example, in Uganda, the new law is going to require the new Sports Act that you have to be incorporated as a company. So if you're incorporated as a company, you then have to declare who the beneficial owners are. So the idea really behind this, which is also happening at the FIFA level, is to be able to lift the veil to find out who actually owns these sports organizations, these clubs, and be able, therefore, to transfer. Because some people, for example, may be subject to sanctions. Some people may be on no-fly list. So the beneficial owner system also works domestically. So from the domestic system, we then also move to the regional system. So what's happening at the African Union level? To my knowledge, the African Union is still trying to put in place rules for this. But at the international level, as Peter has said, we then have what is happening with FIFA has put in place regulations in terms of being able to try and track what is happening with player transfers, club ownership, club acquisition, payments that are being done, who are the beneficial owners, who is the fit and proper person, trying to track the money. We're also seeing that a number of international federations are putting in place hosting principles. Within those hosting principles, hosting means to host these mega events. So before the award, and these days, for our viewers out there, listeners, before countries would bid to host these events, that model of bidding for mega events is slowly changing because of the changing environment. So we're now going towards what is in the sports area called co-creation of a hosting city agreement. So within the hosting principles, there are provisions on these issues of illicit transfers, knowing your customer, human rights violations. So that's an attempt within the global system to try and say if a country has a poor human rights record or is on the IFAT gray list in terms of money laundering, then there might be issues with awarding that country the rights to host or the city to host, or even some individuals, because some individuals may be subject to sanctions in their individual capacity and the part of sports. We are seeing, for example, that some international federations have leaders who have been put on the US no-flies list and a red list. And they are having problems with the International Olympic Committee. I think Philip, I see him online, can talk more to that in terms of what's happening with boxing and others. So we are seeing that even globally, the system is also being tightened to try and include this issue. The IOC itself has put in place a manipulation of competition that is more on gambling, which is related a bit to this gambling and manipulation of competition, illegal betting, which is also related to sports washing in many ways. But we'd like to see a convergence between what states are doing and what the sports area are doing. At the level of the UN, we have the UN Convention Against Corruption, which is also used. And there's also a declaration at the UN level in terms of a declaration on sporting and corruption in sport, trying to work against that, as well as doping. We haven't talked about doping yet. Doping is also another area where this happens. So to me, we are seeing a slow but sure convergence at the level of set. As we shall talk about later, there is a need for interagency cooperation where the lawyers, law enforcement have to come in. So that to me is how we are seeing the legal framework evolve at that level. And I think sports is playing catch up to be able to be aware and aligned to what is happening in terms of the sports washing and money laundering bit. And I think that's where we are in terms of I'll just add to what Peter was talking about earlier.
Yeah, maybe just to bring you back to your last point on, and given your recent participation with the Olympic Games, I know there was a policy put in place on the human rights-based approach. Could you maybe kind of give us an overview of that and how possibly it could have catered for this area with the France as a host for the Olympic Games?
Yes, that's an interesting question. No, in terms of the human rights space, first of all, the IOC, that's the International Olympic Committee, has put in place an advisory committee on human rights, which is the first of its kind. We never had it before. And the idea really is, number one, with this human rights-based approach, is the athletes are at the center of what we do. So the athletes have a declaration on the rights and responsibilities of athletes, which is human rights centered in terms of ensuring that the welfare of the athletes and within the ecosystem is protected. There are questions around when it comes to hosting of these mega events and building new stadiums, are the rights of the workers taken into account? So issues of human rights are closely linked. The other issue which came up, which is an issue that is, let's say, still under evolution. I think you saw the Algerian boxer in Paris. We had the question around the gender testing and how do you deal with LGBTI, how do you deal with transgender issues. These are things which are being discussed at the level of the Olympics, because there was a very big social media and media outroar that the lady from Italy said that she could not box any further because the boxer from country X she felt was not a woman. So there are those issues in terms of how do you discuss participation, how do you look at issues of rules on transgender and moving forward. But by and large, what we are seeing now is a growing recognition that sports and human rights need to be aligned. The best interests of the athlete, issues around protecting their privacy, there were issues around social media use. Mental health is coming up quite a bit in terms of human rights and a human rights-based approach. We saw a lot of athletes from Tokyo after COVID being affected. So when we talk about even sports washing, it's not just about the reputation of the individuals, but also the issue around how do we ensure that the athletes are protected from the extreme pressures that come with participating at this elite level. So the human rights-based approach means link it to the international human rights norms, link it to the principles of non-discrimination, because non-discrimination is a very big topic related to sports washing. No country should be discriminated against. No athlete should be discriminated against on the basis of their nationality, their origin, their sexual orientation. When you come to sports, if I link it to sports washing, some countries, as we're saying, politically don't agree. But what happens if they meet on the field of play? So when it comes to issues like these mega events, things like assuring that people should be able to get visas, be able to attend. Another issue, know yourself, you are putting on the hijab here. That's another big topic when it comes to having sports equipment and kit that is culturally relevant and competent for everybody. So you saw, for example, with beach volleyball, some teams were fully dressed, others were not. So, but how do you respect the different cultures? So that's also part of, some people say it's sports washing, but sports washing really is about trying to portray a country's image in the best way forward and not using it to hide the negative aspects. So coming back to your question, when you're talking about relating human rights and sports, there's a very big movement now to ensure that sports is anchored within the normative legal framework of human rights. That is, link it to the standards, like the International Declaration of Human Rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the rights of disabilities. We're going to have the para sports coming now, Paralympics, to ensure that there's equal and inclusive sport for everybody. So these are issues which even now as legal people, we need to begin integrating within our domestic policies to ensure that human rights and sports are aligned and to protect sports from sports washing in terms of these negative aspects that sports washing is trying to, if you may camouflage, for lack of a better word.
Thank you, Dr. Don, for that, I think, very comprehensive explanation of the human rights vis-a-vis sports. I think I'll hand over to Timothy for the next question.
All right, thanks, Nora, and thanks, Doctor. Thanks, Peter, for taking us through that. As we near the hour mark, just tell our attendees for the day that feel free to begin preparing those questions for us. You can send them in the chat. We'll be happy to read them and direct them to our panelists for the day, or see how we can handle them as they come in. So our next segment, we're going to be seeing how crimes, because this one we've been seeing really how human and people's rights relate to sport. We're going to see how crime itself relate with sport, with starting with Peter. But before we go to Peter, I would like Don to also further highlight on a recent development still on segment that we are closing on at in the fit and proper person test. We're seeing it as a nuance in the football world, especially in the English Premier League. We know of a club, Newcastle United, whose takeover was severally blocked, among others, that have been trying to, among other persons that have been trying to take over clubs in the United Kingdom, but they've been subject to this stringent test. And many of them argue in that that test at times is an extension, or at least the takeover is to block. That test is to block any takeovers in mega sports, especially in world football, to be used as sports washing. So we'd like to also Don to give us more insight in this test and its efficacy to avert sports washing, if you could describe it as such, Doctor.
Yes, I thank you, Timothy. Again, you're asking, what I call the hot potato issues in sports. And when you talk about the fit and proper test, basically what it's trying to look at is to try and prevent corrupt or people who are perceived to be corrupt or untrustworthy people from taking over particular position, whether it's in the companies or in this particular case for football, whether it is the acquisition of clubs. So FIFA has put in place a structure and a process when it comes, and also with the FA in England, to try and avert club, because money laundering, as we said earlier, because there's a link, Timothy, between money laundering and what you're talking about. Money laundering, if you go back to the definition we had at the beginning, is where you have disguising financial assets or inflows so that they can be used without detection of the illegal activity, then that is then later on sanitized. So one possible area where money laundering can take place is through player transfers. So you acquire, so you have, let's say, bad money, illicitly obtained money, you purchase Nuru, the player, through a club, put the money through the club, through the purchase, and then the money gets into the banking system, and then in many ways it's sanitized. That's a simplistic way of saying money laundering. So you can do this through player acquisition, player transfer, club acquisition, broadcast rights, questions around sponsorship. Sponsorship is a very big topic. Now, when it comes to the FA, what they are trying to avert is people with questionable, and that's where the political part issues, who determines what's political. I cannot answer that, Nora and Peter. But let's put, you remember even before we go to Tottenham, here in Uganda, we had a well-known socialite who at one time purported was going to buy one of the Premier League clubs. He was moving around with large wads of cash. The source of that cash was not very clear. I think you remember that case, Timothy, very well. So the issue here is the fit and proper test is to be able to protect the football industry from people coming in with illicitly or questionable sources of income and acquiring a club and sanitizing. So that's what they're trying to do. Now, the question there that comes into play is, are they using that test judiciously? That's a political, I can't give that political answer. But the genesis behind that fit and proper person test and also the beneficiary owner idea is, don't come into the football system, acquire Club X for $500 million. What is the source of that money? Can you show us who you are? Have you paid your taxes? Where did you get this money from? And we're also seeing this also with sponsorship. Increasingly, there are questions being asked. These days, it's not just a matter of saying that Club X, Team X will accept sponsorship from Company Y, because Company Y might be associated with illicit activities or illicit flows. So we are seeing this, for example, with Gazprom and all these in the past. So questions around that is what's going on. So to me, I understand the principle. Sometimes people say it's a bit political, it's a bit sentimental. Why should someone come from a different jurisdiction and acquire a traditionally communal club that has been in the hands of persons? But I think in many ways, Timothy, this is part of what I would call the globalization of sport. We're seeing this happening in the public sector, the private sector. Companies are increasingly being owned, and Peter talked about this intricate way that you hide behind multiple layers of ownership. So who, for example, now owns Saatchi and Saatchi, Harrods, who owns Land Rover, who owns Toyota? You'll find that it's an intricate globalization where you have multinational companies, where you have foundations, agencies, companies owning, shell companies owning a bit of a bit. And therefore, it becomes very hard to unwrap that onion of finding out who exactly is behind this. But the idea, the mischief rule here is to prevent illicit money coming into sports via acquisition of clubs. But again, it's a very emotive discussion, and you can talk for the whole day, because there are those who are pro and against, saying that people are hiding behind protectionism, saying we want to protect Villa FC, for example, from being purchased by someone from a different part of the country or from different country. Why should you own our precious Tottenham, which should be owned? Remember, the Glazer brothers is a very good example with Manchester United. It's a well-known case. They were based in the US, purely commercial. They bought Manchester United. The local fans were not happy, but from a global perspective, they injected money into it. So the fit and proper person test really is to try and guard against illicit money finding its way into the ecosystem of sport through acquisition of clubs, players, transfers, broadcast, sponsorship, and issues of that nature. So I hope, Timothy, that answers your question.
Yes, it very well does. Thanks, Doctor. So we'll let you catch a breath and bring in Peter to take us into the next segment, which is the criminal bit of it. Now, the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime is now serious on the issue of sport being used for international criminal acts. And majorly it's drug trafficking and trafficking of persons, which is many persons, especially in this part of the world, of the continent, Africa and Middle East, have been victims of this. FIFA is trying to streamline this by at least taking back licensing in its own docket and making the system global, easily verifiable, so that it can tackle any form of human trafficking that is also used, that is embedded, that people embed into the world of sport. And also, we've had of times our colleagues from West Africa who have been put on planes to allegedly go and play football. But in the long run, they have not been sent to wherever they have to play the football from, whether in Eastern Europe or in the Middle East, with sporting kits, but they've been sent with drugs, unfortunately. And of course, if it doesn't go well, they end up being taking the beating of the law there without any recourse whatsoever. Of course, if you put into context, you're in a foreign country, you think that you've come here to play football, but you're there, you're being trafficked, and you're being used to traffic drugs. So Peter, would like to have your insights on how more in detail is sport being used to complete these criminal schemes.
Thank you, Temos. As what I've said before, there have been numbers of cases concerning on the issue of trafficking, human trafficking, and drug abuse. And basically the target was for the youngsters who are now transferred from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction. And basically because by themselves cannot they cannot protect. So it has been an issue for some times, and if I can recall, in 2018 when FIFA came with clearinghouse regulation, which among other things was to address on the issue of protection and the safeguarding of minors, and also on the issue of financial transparency in the transfer and in training and solidarity contribution. And the United Nations also has taken its law, and I remember there is an MOU in place between United Nations Office of Drugs and FIFA, and also there are some initiatives with the International Olympic Committee. I think Dr. Don can drive and give a big picture with the International Olympic Committee. And there have been a number of initiatives going on, and for now, and I know you are a FIFA agent. There are some issues which are in place concerning safeguarding and transfer of minors from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction. So that is for me.
All right. Thanks, Peter. Don would like very much want to have you back and also hear your take on the criminal elements or schemes that are being used or completed with the aid of sport, especially that is going as much as catching the attention of the United Nations Office on drugs and crime. So we would like to also have your insight on how these criminal schemes are being completed and what we can do as lawyers to avert that from staining the beautiful games.
Thank you very much, Timothy, and thank you, Peter. Yeah, this is another big area which is coming up quite a bit. And when you talk about crime and sport, let's first begin domestically, because again, as I said, we use a tripartite arrangement, national, regional, domestic. So nationally, there is definitely the possibility of crime invading into sport. So what we are seeing is that we would like to see domestically countries putting in place legal frameworks that criminalize certain aspects. So in Uganda, for example, the National Sports Act 2023 has put in place issues of betting, issues of hooliganism and crime. So that is one piece that we need to look at. And to avoid also within the country, we have had also within the same National Sports Act, the movement of minors. Well, that's where a lot of problems come when it comes to trafficking. Movement of minors, you need the permission of their parents, their guardians, and we're seeing that's what we're seeing at the level that Peter was talking about global. But you first also begin domestically. What rules and regulations do you have to avert trafficking internally before it happens abroad? It can happen between cross countries, so cross borders, cross boundaries, but also within the country. So it's important that countries also take steps to mitigate against internal trafficking, internal crime, internal issues. So that's one aspect. But also what we are seeing is that we are also seeing a growing movement in terms of trying to put in place responses. The UN office that you've talked about for drugs and crime, especially their regional office in Nairobi, is putting in place a lot of mechanisms and awareness programs to try and deal with the issue of illicit transfer and trafficking of children when it comes to sports issues. Also, not only athletes, but also during mega events like the Olympics and other events, people traffic people for visas and they want to move. So that's also another issue which people are looking at. The issue around illegal betting is another topic which I think Noor and Timothy and Gilbert, we need to think about having a whole topic on sports betting, because there's legal betting and illegal betting. But the illegal betting area, which is a crime, is also another big area where people are using this, and the sports washing and money laundering comes into play. So we are seeing a lot of movement internationally to try. The IOC has put in place, I said, that task force to deal with this issue, to be able to ensure that trafficking of athletes and sports people and general people within the entourage is not done. Crime like illegal betting is not done. Match fixing, which is also another big area where people are threatened, and that amounts to a crime. But we need these to maybe add crimes domestically, because one of the biggest issues that we have within the sports system when it comes to this issue of trafficking illegal is what Peter talked about, the transboundary nature of it. And therefore, do we have the necessary legal tools to be able to effectively enforce domestically? So what happens, for example, if Don traffics Philip, but I take you to the UK, I take you to Paris, which laws apply? Will it be the laws of France? Will it be the international laws? Will it be the laws of Uganda? The crime was committed probably in Paris. What happens? So a lot of times this issue of the jurisdictional aspects, is it a crime in a particular country? Is it classified as human trafficking, or is it illegal, as illegal movement of people being in a country illegally? So these are issues that we need to look at. But the role of lawyers, to answer your question, that we need to be part of what we call the interagency platform. And that's what the IOC is pushing for, that we bring together different stakeholders. Because in this domain of crime and sports, it's not going to be the purview of one agency. It has to be the lawyers from the private sector, the lawyers within sports organizations, the international federations, national federations. Interpol plays a very big role in this, the international police, because of detection. There is the issue around governments, law enforcement, the regulators, because we have, for example, when it comes to betting, we have the regulators, the gaming and betting authorities within particular countries. So all these different, the media plays a very, very important role in exposing what is going on in this area, whether it is with crime or trafficking. So all these people need to come together in what they call a national platform. So what the IOC is pushing for is creation of a national platform, and this is something we're trying to do in Uganda, to create a national platform that brings together all these different actors so that we can have a common response to some of these issues that are happening within both our jurisdiction, but also further afield.
All right. Thanks, Doctor, for sharing us in such good detail. Now, to our attendees, we'll just remind that if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A. If you'd like to have the microphone, you can start pushing those hands up, and we'll be able to pick it up from there to give a chance to share with us. We'll also bring in briefly Mr. Philip Munavi, who is also another member of the cluster, to also give his views before we go into the Q&A. But before we get to that, we would like to bring back Peter. Peter, we've listened in on the gaps that we have, and of course we had your insights and those of Doctor, alleging that there seems to be no clear framework on how we can comprehensively address these issues. So we want to kind of contextualize it in a manner of looking forward. What can we do? What can be done? And in what context? We've had Dr. Okaro mentioned initiatives by the IOC. We've also listened into initiatives by FIFA. No, that doesn't cut across all sports disciplines. We've had Dr. share with us on the initiatives by the English FA, which of course does not apply here. We've known of at least the requirements under the Uganda's new Sports Act just last year, but that may not be the same for in Tanzania, where you're based, Peter. So we would want to know, looking forward, what can we do to address the gaps that have come up in this discussion? Peter?
Thank you, Timothy. On my case, I think it is to bring all the stakeholders on board, and as what Dr. Donner said, given the complexity of sports washing, It is the high time for in our local jurisdiction to enhance measures which are to put measures in place to do away with illicit money laundering and the like of sports washing. The experience, for instance, in Tanzania, where we have a little bit outdated sports law, which does not cover any areas concerning sports washing, and we are now in the process of making a new law. With the stakeholders on board, for instance, the law enforcement agencies which are in place. If they are on board, that will give a good room to have a comprehensive legal framework that avert the illicit and the sport washing. As what doctors reiterated before, with the measures which are in place, for instance, we had almost 3 cases of human trafficking in Tanzania, where the Interpol had played a very great role to ensure that the trafficked minors are brought back to the country. So with inclusion of stakeholders, that will make a better position for having a comprehensive legal framework that protects that avoid illicit and sports washing.
All right. Thanks, Peter. Before we also bring in Doctor to share his views on what we could do going forward, we recognize all our attendees here. We're happy to have at least former Cranes cricket captain Davis Karishani. We've invited you to speak. Hopefully, after Peter, after Philip, you could come in to share with us your practical insights from a player's perspective. What is your take on it? Good to have you here. I have Judith Zebediah, our colleague from Tanzania, who has arranged such similar panels. We'll also be glad to hear from you later on. But before we get to that, Doctor, I would like to bring you in and give us your perspective of what we could do going forward to better the status quo.
No, thank you, Timothy. I think Peter has already alluded to this. One of the things I think that a couple of things we need to do, and I'm happy that the East African Law Society through Gilbert and Gabriel and team have taken up this issue. One is we need to have this continuous engagement, 365, we call it 365 in sports, on the questions of sports washing, money laundering, illicit. So awareness building is critical. Most lawyers don't normally acknowledge that sports legal or sports law exists. So I'm happy that now, a few years later, we are no longer the lone voices kind of batting for sports law. So awareness, first of all, that sports law exists and these different topics needs to be continuous. So I applaud the East African Law Society for joining us in this, and we need to keep this momentum going across the region. We used to have the sports law conferences, and we're going to have those international sports law where we bring eminent speakers to speak to some of these topics. So awareness, Timothy, is critical. Because once you're aware of the issue, then we can do that. Advocacy is the second piece to that. Once people are aware, then we can have advocacy programs on trying to ensure that we stamp out sports washing, we stamp out illegal transfer of funds, questions around trafficking, and all these issues. Then we need to ensure that we have a robust legal framework. We are happy that in Uganda, we have a new law. Here in Tanzania is thinking about it. Kenya has the Sports Act of 2013. I would have to check what's happening in Rwanda and Burundi, but we need to have a legal regime that speaks. Because one of the issues, Timothy, when, for example, we're talking about corruption and crime, and we still are relying on the general definitions in the law. For example, in Uganda, we are still relying heavily on the Anti-Corruption Act, which is general. So the corruption that is defined is not sports specific. But if, for example, you look at what some people have defined corruption from sports, they'll say corruption in sports involves any illegal, immoral, unethical activity that attempts to deliberately distort the result of a sporting contest for the personal material gain of one or more parties involved in that activity. So we need to have that sports specificity in the law. Right now, we have just general abuse of office for private gain. So it's public office. So you might find it very hard to link that to sport, because could you argue that we're holding public offices in sport? You could argue that. But one of the big challenges is having a legal regime that is sports-centric. And I think that's one issue that we are advocating also, putting in place the legal structure and then having the enforcement mechanisms. Because it's one thing to have the law, but the law must be enforced. And that's why we're even trying to see, could we have like a sports tribunal? Could we have proper arbitration mechanisms of all these issues? Can we have trainings with lawyers, the judiciary, so people can be aware? I wish we had some people from the judiciary here so they can be aware of some of these issues that are related to sports and the things that we're discussing. And then lastly, we have that interagency cooperation, because it's not a one agency that will be able to fight all these things alone. We need the sports fraternity, we need the government side, we need law enforcement, we need the media, we need academia. All of us need to sit together, and then collectively with this, what we are calling the national platform, we're able to advance an agenda that is trying to stamp out the issues that you have raised, Timothy. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it very well does. Many thanks, Doctor, for those insights. Imagine your hand, and you come in just after Mr. Philip Monavi has shared his insights just briefly on the subject. Philip?
Thank you, Timothy. It has been a learning session for me. Thank you, Doctor and Peter and everyone on call. Because it has been a learning session for me, I also need to get Doctor's view on the Russian question. Some while ago, I think he's aware that Russia was organizing the World Friendship Games against the Olympic Games. So I would wish to get his view. And I think he has also observed that mainly in boxing, Russia has the president, if I may say, because it's tagged on him, the president of IBA, International Boxing Federation, has been deliberate on pushing a lot of finances in the boxing games, like prize awards, organizing events that are fully sponsored by him. So I would wish to get his view. But also something that has struck me over the last period, I've received some contracts from local boxers who are picked up by international agencies, and they are given a contract which they term as international advisor contract. The contract is silent on the finances involved. It's only, the key points are the image rights, use of image rights, and the period of the contract. So I would like to get Doctor's view as in line with sports washing. Thank you.
I know Doctor is right now in the hot seat, but Doctor?
I thought we had agreed that you were going to immunize me from those political questions that Philip is bringing up. Yeah, but Philip, I'll send you a fee note for the last question. you know that the advocates rules don't allow me to give free legal advice. But on the issue, let me begin with the easy part, with your permission, Timothy. Do I have the permission, Mr. Moderator?
Yes, you do, Doctor.
Yeah, so Timothy, let me begin with the easy part of your question. The first one is on the contracts. The issue is one, and I want to link it because it's a very broad question, but I want to link it to the topic of today, sports washing and money laundering. First of all, do you as Philip do your due diligence? The international actors you're dealing with, have you done due diligence to know that they're legitimate? Because what you don't want is to be involved in trafficking, because we've had instances where you have those kind of contracts, people go and they find themselves in a different situation. So do your due diligence that the people you're dealing with are actually the right people. So maybe reach out to their regulators, reach out to their national sports federations or system to first of all establish whether or not they are legitimate. Two, I find it incomprehensible that there can be a legal contract without consideration. Image rights and intellectual property I can understand, but it's important that one, whoever you're going to sign this contract is above the age of 18. Two, you know where they're going and the safeguards, because you have to be very clear that they are going. So to me, I would advise that you do your due diligence on those on the parties to the contract. Make sure you negotiate for a proper consideration for your clients, and be sure that they're above the age of 18, because what you don't want to do is them getting into a situation where they're going to be trafficked, especially if they are female, and they find themselves, even young boys find themselves in a situation that they did not anticipate. So that's would be my quick advice to you, Philip, to check these international advisory contracts that you have been sent. And I don't see why there should not be a consideration clause, but also issues of bonus, merchandising, access to all these things need to be tied up. Taxation. So I think we can have an offline discussion, Philip, and discuss this further. On the issue of Russia and the Russian games and the IBA question, that is highly interesting. All I can say is that Russia went through two big issues. One was the anti-doping, and these are public, the anti-doping problem, the doping question, where it was believed and stated that there was widespread systemic government-supported doping. So the Russian athletes were banned from attending for a long time international events. And then two more recently, due to the conflict that is ongoing, we saw that in Paris, because of that conflict, very emotive question, different views on different sides of the table, but Russia did not participate. They were called AIN, athletes in a neutral place. So they were not allowed to fly their flag, but some international federations were not allowed. So the official position of the IOC, I believe, was that Russians could take part if the international federations allow it, and if there is no direct support for the war in Ukraine. If, for example, if you're not a member of the armed forces and anything like that. So that was something about the Russian games. And in direct response, then now, these games we talked about are being organized, and that's an ongoing discussion. And I think countries will have to take their own decisions. But I think the IOC is very clear they're discouraging people from attending those games. And I think that is something we shall see once they come up, I think, next year in terms of those friendship games and solidarity games. In terms of the president that you talked about, again, that goes back to questions around what is the source of funding. There has been a very big controversy. That particular gentleman you mentioned has been mentioned to be part of the no-fly lists of the US, and therefore that's why there was a very big problem between the IOC and International Boxing Federation, which has now became the World Anti-Boxing, which is now the IBA. It led to among other things, due to their officials being alleged in match fixing and not doing things and governance questions, the IOC decided to formally expel the IBA. And boxing and the question of it being in Los Angeles is still issue under discussion. So that is part of what the whole question is, that we need to be clear as to where the source of funding comes from. And as we said earlier, Philip, sports washing is about countries, governments, and individuals who might use money to clean their image. And I'm not saying that this is what happened in this particular case, but I'm saying that this is something we all need to guard against going forward. So I hope I've answered your 3 questions, Philip.
Yes. Thanks, Doctor, for eating that big frog. And Philip
I hope
must
it
be
doesn't
glad.
choke me in the process.
No,
You've
it
answered
will,
me,
no, it
Doctor.
will.
But
Yes,
I'm
now
sending
I
the
would
fee
like,
note to Philip. I'm sending my fee note to Philip shortly.
I'll be the tax man. I'll be the tax
Doctor,
man.
it's the seniors who are supposed to pay the juniors.
Yes, I would like to bring in Captain Davis Karashani, who's an international cricketer, to give us a player's perspective, especially since now he has a chance to be on both sides of the coin, as one a lawyer practicing and one a professional athlete who's had the chance to grace the games. Davis, if you could please unmute. Davis? Right, as we wait for Davis, let me as first as Judith to come in. Judith, if you could come in, I've passed on the mic to you. Judith Zebediah, if you could hear me, I've just passed on the mic to you. Same for Davis and Immaculate. All right, probably before as we wait for them to come in, let me Noor, can you read on some questions from the Q&A?
Yeah. Thank you. So we have a couple of questions, one from Maxwell, the other one from Magati, which are multiple questions. So the first one, and any of the panelists can take this one. Do you think FIFA's non-interference rule could be an enabler of crime, particularly money laundering? And how do countries navigate this rule when it comes to investigations? From Maxwell Kibesan. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce the name, but anyway, yeah, he's part of the audience this afternoon.
Well, I think, thank you, Noor. I've seen Maxwell from Ghana, and it's good to see Maxwell from Ghana. I think that's an interesting question. The non-interference rule is a general rule in sport. It's called the protecting the responsible autonomy of sport. And in many ways, some people will argue that that non-interference principle might allow sports washing or money laundering to happen. But to answer Maxwell, FIFA has its own internal mechanisms to investigate these matters. So that's how they go against it. So depending on which side of the pendulum of the table you are, you could argue on the one side that the FIFA rules and regulations are in place to guard against crime and money laundering, and they'll use their system to investigate and punish. But at the same time, you could say that the autonomy rule might be used. But in my view, you cannot hide behind the autonomy rule, because if you have breached, that's where it comes back to what I said earlier, Maxwell. If we have a robust legal framework in Ghana, in Uganda, across Africa, across the world, if a person is found to be guilty or alleged to have breached particular money laundering issues, whether it's in the sports area, then the laws of the land will apply to you. You cannot hide behind the non-interference clause. But this is something which is an ongoing discussion, Maxwell. But I hope that the way around it is to ensure that we have robust legal frameworks in place, and then you cannot hide behind the autonomy rule, in my view. Though I know sometimes international federations are very protective of saying they want the sports matters to be handled within the sports docket. I also see, Madam, no, there's Joshia's question about sports washing in Kenya.
So here's 3, so maybe I can read them one by one. The first one was, what impact has sports washing had on the public perception of the governance and corruption in Kenya?
I
Maybe
cannot speak to that, because I think that I'll leave you to answer. You're more familiar with Kenya. But I know the Gen Zs have been very active when it comes to asking for accountability. I'm not aware of any mega events that have happened in Kenya recently that have been used to deflect. But I think what I could answer, it has the general possibility, but I'm not aware of any, Mr. Joshua, of any sports events. I know Kenya was hosting the World Athletics recently, but to my knowledge, I don't have any information on that question. And also the same thing in terms of the reputation and development of sports in Kenya. All I can say, sports in Kenya is developing quite well, compared to what might be believed in Kenya. You came back from Paris in position number 1, I believe. I have to check my table, because you came back with about 7 medals. So I don't know about the reputation, but I think sports in Kenya is doing well. So I don't know, maybe my colleague Peter might have a better answer. But when we look at the medal table,
11.
In Paris, coming from Paris, top of the table was Kenya in Africa with a total of 11. Second was South Africa with a total of 6. Ethiopia came in 4th, and then Uganda, we came in 6th with the 2 medals. So Kenya, you're doing quite well from a perspective of performance. I cannot speak to the governance because I'm not aware of any particular issues that stand out.
Yeah, no, maybe if I can add from non-interference. As what doctors said, to me, what I see, if you have a robust legal framework, I think it was 2019, I think, when we had our National Football Federation president charged with offense of money laundering. And basically the issue of autonomy and the issue of investigation, which are done by FIFA, could not take a loom, because we had, I remember it was, we had a very good legal framework specifically for money laundering. So as what doctors said, to me, what I see, if you have a robust legal framework, the issue of autonomy and the issue of non-interference by organization like FIFA cannot hold or protect one who is a culprit for illicit or money laundering.
There's another question from Charles. He's addressed it to Doc, but I would like to invite Timothy to wear a different hat for this one as well to answer. He's asking, okay, Doc has covered ownership of teams and clubs extensively. How are Uganda going about it? In Kenya, we have strong big community clubs like Gor Mahia and FC Leopards, where they will or could be a huge resistance toward clubs being acquired by individuals or private entities. How do you structure this transaction if it was to go ahead? And he says he has read models where some suggest 49% to 51%, where the former is owned by the private entity. And how do we then make sure the teams land in the right hands?
All right, thanks for changing my hats that quick. But in Uganda, the statutes mandate a disclosure of club ownership. So even in Uganda, similarly, before the start of the season, one of the things you must disclose is who owns the club. And then if there is any sort of intended transfer of ownership, and there's one ongoing actively, one by Gaddafi. Gaddafi is one of the top flight clubs currently in Uganda, and it is currently being subjected to a takeover. So if the club is going to be taken over, there is a form that is by FIFA, which is the equivalent of our FIFA, but of course at a national level. It's a form that you fill, and it's also subject to a test. You put it slightly so, but many of the things in practice are not highlighted that much. And there is a case of, we have actually a case by our High Court, by a club called Pauline, that FIFA refused to put on the fixture list because it wasn't happy by the nature of the transaction in which that club was taken over. So you could see that one, we have at least a structure or at least a semblance of one where you have to fill in the forms and tell us who's taking over. And of course, you have this meeting with FIFA to also understand who's coming in. But what happens is that even these are nuances the people at FIFA. And what you pay attention to will be taking over the club as if it is a merger or an acquisition of another corporate entity, let's say company. So you look at the documentation, the clubs, the club personnel, especially the players, because the players must maintain their contractual rights that they garnered. And if there is any sort of takeover that distorts the rights of the players that accrued it in under the contract, the players can go against the club that of course was taking over and can go over the ultimate beneficial owners of the transaction. That means that even the persons who could sell off a club, if this is not done in the right way, the players have the right to take you on, but this will be at FIFA level and not at FIFA level. It will be interesting if it is a purely domestic transaction, because then you'll have challenges in whether FIFA would accept jurisdiction of such. That means it must be done locally, but that capacity is not yet there. But at least we have a form where at least we try to show that we are aware about this, of that you must tell us who owns in the first place, then who's taking over, and that takeover must be sanctioned by FIFA before you could be put on the fixture list of the next season. So now, if Gaddafi is being taken over, if it does not do it rightly, then Gaddafi may not appear on the fixture season for Uganda's next Premier League. As to ownership, there are no limitations as to who may hold what percentage. But what is required of you is that you can just tell us who owns. And we know there are those that are owned by corporations. For example, KCCA, one of the biggest clubs in the land, are owned by the Kampala Capital City Authority, which is a body corporate, but a statutory body. And then we also have individuals, the Dr. Rose Mulimba, well known, who's the owner of Vipers, the current, the former defending champions. And then we have those that are like communal, like SC Villa, that have, and they are the current reigning champions or defending champions, that are owned by, you could say, the public. So there are no limitations as ownership, but if you're doing a takeover, you must be alive to one, the club structures, the rights of the athletes, and then filling in that form that FIFA would want you to fill correctly. Yes, that's all that I can share now.
Thank you, Timothy, for that very detailed answer. I mean, I would like to invite Mr. Peter or Dr. John, if you'd like to add on to that, but we have another question here, and I'd like to address it to Dr. John, being the human rights lawyer and expert here. And I know you kind of touched this earlier on when I asked you the question of the human rights-based approach, but the question from Miro Daniel, he's asking, how do you balance the concept of human-based approach in circumstances where there are conflicting beliefs on a certain set of human rights? In context, there are instances where players have refused to wear rainbow colors because of their religion and culture and have faced grave backlash. He's asking, is that fair?
Well, thank you, Noor. Let me first piggyback on what Timothy said, because that question of clubs is a big topic. I think Timothy has talked about the Ugandan jurisdiction, and is very correct in terms of the rules that come up with buying, specifically football club, because there are different kinds of clubs. You can have, basketball, rugby, but I think let's stick with football. Depending on the jurisdiction, in the case of Uganda, as Timothy talked about, we are regulated by currently the National Sports Act 2023. It introduces a new concept of community clubs. We have to see what that will mean in practice. We're waiting for the statutory instrument to come out. But also, as Timothy rightly says, there are those clubs that are part of the leagues in Uganda, which then you can acquire, but subject to complying also with the FIFA. FIFA is our national federation rules. However, the more broader way I would answer that question is that you need to look at each country specifically, because different countries have different setups. Some have community-based clubs where clubs are owned in trust for the community. Others have clubs that are hybrid, which are partially owned by individuals and the community of the local governments. Even the stadiums, by the way, some of them are owned by the clubs. Some of the stadiums are owned by the communities, like the Bernabeu is not really owned by is owned by a slightly different construction. Whereas in the Premier League, these are purely private arrangements, and that's where the rules of acquisition come into place, subject to UK and the FA rules. In the US, if you got the US, more interesting conversation about the National Football League, the National Basketball League, the Baseball League. These are franchises with specific number of franchises, as they are called, and teams that are within, and you can only acquire within that system. And there are very stringent rules about that. And also them within the American system, which is a totally different system. You need a whole day to discuss how the NFL works, the NBL, the NBA. They also have rules now around knowing where the money is coming from. But those are private individuals who come together and buy. You buy the owners, you buy, the Dallas Cowboys, you buy the Chicago Bulls. Again, slightly different from what you have in different jurisdictions. So again, to answer our colleague's question, it will be depending on each jurisdiction and what rules and regulations you have at national level, and also within the body controlling the sport. If it's a football, it will be the FUFAs or the FIFAs. If it's basketball, the national basketball, the NBA setup rules apply. So that's how it would work. Coming to the second question on human rights and the balance. I think the answer to your question lies in that what you've just said, the balance, because these are very emotive issues. Issues, for example, of the rainbow colors and the conflation with religion and culture is an ongoing discussion. And what we are advocating for is one, which is part of the Olympic values. Olympic values are three. Friendship, we should promote friendship. When we're in Paris, you make friends with everybody from all over the world. Commit yourself to excellence, because that's what we are there for. Excellence in both on and off the field of play. And number three, promotion of respect for everybody, irrespective of your views. So one aspect, I think, is respect and tolerance of different cultures, different viewpoints. And I think that's one thing that I would say that my friend Miro Daniel Stewart, that we need to advocate for mutual respect of everybody. As I talked about issues of the traditional wear, hijabs, even in swimming, where I come from, the swim caps that are being designed, the costumes, some of them are designed taking into account particularly from a particular demographic. And there was a very big move that some people have, big hair, and they need to find ways of having a swim cap that can accommodate different hairstyles. So to me, it's an ongoing discussion. We're seeing this even in football, where they have very elaborate rules on racism, non-discrimination in the field of play. FIFA has very many rules where you begin chanting racist things or throwing banana peels or having gestures. All these things are being fought. And what we need to do, all of us, is to continue the conversation that we need to respect everybody, solidarity, and embrace. Was there 206 countries in the Olympics, 206 in Paris, which means you have 206 different cultures, different viewpoints, different religions, different outlooks to life. And even, for example, when we're here in Uganda, when we're preparing our team, we have a code of conduct. We brief our teams, you're going to a different jurisdiction. What might be acceptable in Uganda may not be acceptable in Paris or in Japan. What is acceptable in Japan may not be acceptable here in Uganda. So one increasing topic that we are discussing in sports is cultural competence. Do we respect, we should be able to respect the religions and the views. And that's why we need everybody to be part of the discussion on the policy-making tables. For example, I'll give you another area that we're talking about, Daniel. We are talking about hosting of events these days. Is it proper, is it correct to host a major event during Ramadan when people are fasting? So now we're increasingly having these discussions in the international sphere that if you're hosting an event, make sure you take into account religious aspects. When is Ramadan? People are fasting the whole day. So do not put a major sporting event during Ramadan. When you look at issues around the Olympic Village where we were, the food that is served, they are very careful to make sure we have halal food separated because people have different cultures, different. So it's not only the rainbow colors mirror, but it's a whole host of different things in terms of having appropriate rooms where people can go and pray. So do you provide, when you go to the villages or these places, are there appropriate rooms where people can go and pray in their different faiths? So these are things that are increasingly being discussed at the global level. And I'm happy to report that globally, we're beginning to take more and more attention and acknowledgement to these issues. And I think going forward, what I would say is that we all need, from a human rights perspective, to have non-discrimination, treat everybody with respect, and respect everybody irrespective of their religious and cultural beliefs. So I hope that answers Miro's broad question.
Thank you again, Dr. John, for your comprehensive answer. Timothy, I know for interest of time, we wouldn't like to keep our panelists much longer than this. Is it possible for us to wrap up? I don't see any other questions from the audience.
All right, thanks. I just want to confirm whether we now have Judith and Davis. If any of you could come in, I've just invited you to speak. Judith or Davis? Yeah, I can see Davis's hand up. Davis, if you could please unmute. You have the mic.
Yes, thank you very much. Of course, not just the presenters, but the discussants, at least for the in-depth understanding and knowledge that you have shared to the members on the platform. I think I'll just try and bring in a slight perspective, maybe as a player, to try and understand. I had Timothy speak largely as to aspects to do with ownership, but more often than not, as players never understand the nitty-gritties of who owns, say, the sports organization. However, they find themselves caught up sometimes in the controversies, especially when takeovers are happening. Takeovers are happening and they come in with totally different mindsets in terms of the cultural aspects. A classic example is what happened to a number of football clubs in the UK, whereby new owners from the Middle East then took ownership of the clubs, and eventually it distorted what you would have called the crust of what was the, can I call it the glue that held the players together. So how do then players have an aspect of managing that process? So how do they get involved in ensuring that, whereas takeovers will happen, their interests to a certain degree will be protected?
Yes, thanks, Davis. So, Davis, as a professional cricketer, I would like to also hear from you, or from your experience, or from what you could have gathered from your colleagues, and on the issue of trafficking of players. We hear players being taken from one club to another, and then they're abandoned at different airports. Could you give us a perspective into that, please, if you can?
I think the bigger perspective of that vice, and unfortunately it is a vice that has continued to grow, whereby players find themselves in those predicaments. But the reality, as I did mention or hint on earlier, is that many times players do not exactly get involved in the nitty-gritties of who exactly is going to be in charge of their welfare. Most of the times, players are just simply excited about an offer that has been presented to them on the table, and they do not necessarily always have people to manage that particular process of their professionalism. So they find themselves in trouble. But again, I think this particular Zoom or space happens at a time whereby I think sports has transcended beyond what happens on the football field or whatever field of play, that people are starting to take full recognition of what happens off the field. So as a player, as you rightly stated, is that more often than not, players are simply excited about the offer that is presented to them, and they never take full understanding of aspects of welfare. So it's a tough one to take, unfortunately, right now, but we need to find a solution to it. very, very quickly.
Timothy, can I jump in?
Right. Yes, Doctor.
I think what Davis is raising is the issue around, I won't talk about the traffic because we talked about that, but the issue around ownership and welfare of athletes. That's why FIFA has very elaborate rules on the protection of players. There's a whole regulation, Davis, on protection and transfer of players. So once these are followed, the idea behind those rules is to protect the players. First of all, you have to have a contract, a representation contract with your agent, but also with the club. So even when there's a new ownership, in theory, there's a succession of the contract that you have. So the new ownership is supposed to ensure that your interest, the interests and the rights and responsibilities of the player are protected, irrespective of the ownership. Of course, there's been a lot of questions around ownership coming in, the role of the manager, the role of the coach. And even, by the way, Davis, these days, there's a very big conversation around some influential players like Mbappe who are given theoretically where I'm told in their contracts, the ability, for example, to say they have some say on who the coach will be. And that has caused a bit of backlash. But the other bit which is coming up to protect players' interests is FIFPro. FIFPro is like a trade union. FIFPro acts as the body that is supposed to try and protect players from what exactly you're describing, Davis. FIFPro acts as the agent or the trade union the voice that speaks on behalf of some of the players whose interests might be inadvertently, let's say, disadvantaged if there's a change. But the theory, the way it works is that these rules exist to protect the players from undue, not only transfer by the Davis, it could even be things like injury. So there are very explicit rules around long-term injuries. You cannot just terminate a player, having insurance in place to make sure that they're protected. So all these different mechanisms exist. The issue, I think, is for the players to be fully aware. That's what FIFPro is trying to do. FIFPro is working very hard to have these awareness seminars for players so that you're aware of your rights and responsibilities, so that you don't fall afoul if there's a change in ownership. It should not in any way affect your contractual obligations with the club. But if there's a fundamental difference, then people may have to let you go, but through the legal and recognized means of transfer of players. So I thought I'll just add that to your question, Davis.
Right. Thanks, Don. Dr. Donald Okare there. Many thanks to also former Cranes captain Davis Kawashani for giving us that player perspective. I don't know if we have Judith with us to share just in a minute or two. Judith? Okay, I guess not. So we would like to thank our panelists. We would like to thank our attendees who have sacrificed these 2 hours to learn with us in this interesting session. We also want to thank the East African Law Society for hosting this and giving Sports Law yet another chance to gather and share ideas and learn more with each other. So I'd like to give it back to our chairperson, Noor, who may invite Gabriel from the ELS to see us off for the evening.
Yeah, thank you, Timothy. And again, thank you once again to our panelists for taking the time and for your very insightful contributions, and to all of you from the audience for participating in today's discussion. It's clear that sports washing is a multifaceted issue that requires a coordinated effort from all stakeholders, including the legal community, sports organization, and law enforcement agencies. As we move forward, continued vigilance and collaboration will be key in preserving the integrity of sports and financial system that support them. Just to wrap up, thank you, and we look forward to continued engagement in this critical topic. I would like to invite both panelists to give their final remarks, and then Gabriel from the ELS cohort for the closing feedback.
Well, I can go
Dr.
first.
John can start. Yeah.
Right, thank you, Noor. I'd like first of all to thank all of you. Thank you, Noor. Thank you, Timothy, for very expertly co-moderating this. Thank you, Gabriel, and the East African Law Society for this. Let's keep this conversation going. I thank all the participants for their very, very insightful questions. What I would say that let's keep the conversation going. Sports law is here with us. There are very many topics that we need to work on. Sports washing and money laundering are a reality. We need to ensure that we collectively work together to stamp out the ill vices that these come along with. And I think collectively, we in the legal profession have a role to play with other actors. And I look forward to taking forward this conversation with all of you in concert with the international federations, law enforcement, media, and we in the legal profession. So thank you very much, and asante sana.
Yeah, for me, I would many thanks to Noor, Timoth, and Dr. Don, that was to Gabriel and the East Africa Law Society for having this insightful session. And maybe to sport lawyers and the lawyers in East Africa, we have a very pivotal role to play to avail for sport washing, given the complexity of the topic itself, and we wish to have many topics, be it on sport washing or any other aspect of sports. And we are ready to move and roll on sports law in East Africa.
Thank you, Peter. Gabriel, would you like to come on and give your parting shots, please? Anyway, I'm not sure Gabriel is available, but then again, like I said, really want to keep you here much longer. I think that was a very, very insightful session, and there's a lot to learn from both panelists and our moderator who interjected at some point. But again, thank you so much for joining us, and looking forward to future events and collaboration and discussions on this topic and any other related sports issues that are happening in Africa and globally. Good afternoon, everyone, and have a lovely day.
Thanks. Have a lovely day, everyone.